I'm Greg Danigian. I'm looking working with you guys. Hi, Jennifer. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. You don't have to turn your camera on. It's just nicer if you do. Hi, Ken.
Hello.
Hello. Hi, Tiffany.
And you got to remember, Greg's a salesman, so he's used to seeing people.
Yeah, I peddle the peddlers. Exactly.
And just about everyone we've got on the call today is going to be sales or sales management,
Okay.
so which would be good. And Jennifer, this becomes one of those other similar opportunities down the line, right?
Does.
Bring it to
Hi,
the
Chastity.
so,
Hi, David.
I think we're pretty much getting there, Greg, because starting to plateau out on the registration.
All right.
So we'll get going. In respect of everyone's time, well, I wanted to thank everyone for their readership of Electrical Trends. As you know, we've been running that for now 16 years, and hopefully you find the content that I put out there of value, and occasionally may spur an idea that we can then help you with on the channel marketing group side. Over the summer, I was looking at various sites and things like that, and happened to see a session that Sales and Marketing Management was putting on that Greg was holding. And the session was based upon team selling. So I attended the session, and within our industry, joint sales calls are a key demand generator for reps, for manufacturers, distributors, and obviously have benefit for the contractor, for the industrial end user. But we all know the challenges that joint sales calls have historically had. They can be great when they go well, and then there are those times where there's issues of, shall we say, trust. So that gets people to be reticent about having. So in sitting through Greg's session, I started thinking, it'd be good if we could bring this type of training to the industry. And maybe there's a few people, all of you, who can take something away and say, all right, here's how I can make joint sales calls better for my company. How can I make it better for, ideally myself, to be more successful? So I offered Greg the opportunity to put the article out on ET, and he's going to do some other writing over the course of the year on some other sales training topics. Greg's company, GNA Training, is a Sandler training franchise. Greg took me up on the offer, wrote the article, and going to run the session today and share some ideas with you. And hopefully you see value in it. And based upon your input, we can do this on a more frequent basis. So with that, Greg, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Hey, thanks a lot, David. Really appreciate the introduction and welcome everybody. We're going to try to keep this interactive, upbeat, fun, but packed with material. And Jim, did you switch it back to 100% speaker view with me? Okay, great. You've got breakout groups already lined up. And can you make it breakout groups of about 5 people? So can you eliminate room 4 and spread David, Mike, and Tiffany out amongst the other groups? So we do a lot of breakout group exercises because we find that as adults, we learn by doing. So if you get a chance to practice material and process techniques and takeaways and things of that nature, it really, really helps. To kind of set the tone for the workshop, I drafted something, and you may have read parts of it already in the article that David published. So I'm just going to kick it off by reading this very, very quickly, and then we're going to jump right into a breakout group exercise where you guys will get a chance to share some information with each other that'll be useful, I think, to each other, but also share some information to me that'll help me to navigate. Because I got to tell you, I've got enough material to do a full day program on team selling and making effective joint sales calls. So I want to pinpoint areas that you're very interested in, so that by the time we end in about an hour and 23 minutes, you really feel good about the time you invested today. Also, if you really feel good about the time you invested today and are interested in ongoing training for your company, that's what we do. We're a full service sales and sales management training organization. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are based in Massachusetts by a show of hands? Of course, there's some people. So, okay, so everybody's out of state right now. Okay, all right. I'm just curious how many of you guys are all local. So I'm going to read this really quickly and hopefully you'll be able to relate to it. How many times have you cringed when you sat back helplessly listening as your partner destroyed the months of hard work you spent cultivating an account? Anybody ever have that experience? Okay, couple of you. All right, that's what we're going to work on today, right? The success of a joint call is in direct proportion to the amount of time spent on planning and rehearsing. Unfortunately, most people don't know how to plan. They don't know how to rehearse. They don't have a process or a strategy. And that's what today's program is all about. So we suggest you conduct what we like to call a coffee shop meeting with your partner. And that happens prior to the call. And I'm going to get deep into these things that I'm going to share right off the bat. But you'd run through a pre-call checklist with your partner, discussing the bonding information you already know about the prospect. Review the upfront contract with your partner. Now, an upfront contract is a Sandler term. Have any of you guys had Sandler training? I'm just curious. Any of you guys have Sandler training? Anybody at all? Nobody's had Sandler training? Okay. So I can cover some things in here that won't be redundant. An upfront contract is a verbal agreement between you and the prospect, or you and the client, or you and the customer, as to what's going to actually take place on the joint sales call. And generally it involves an agreement on what the goal of the call is, how long the call is going to take, and possible outcomes for the call. So we'll get a little bit further into that too. So again, you review the upfront contract with your partner during the coffee shop meeting, the pains and the pain indicators and all relevant history about the prospect, where the call came from. You have history with the account, or is it a brand new prospects? We're going to get deep into that. That's what the program is all about. So you have shorter sales cycles, higher closing ratios, and more meaningful joint sales calls, and you're supporting each other in a way that doesn't make the prospect feel like you're ganging up on her or him. All right. So I'm going to go right to some of the breakout group exercises. And Jim, can you upload the link to the workbook, please?
Yes.
Okay. So you guys will have access to the same workbook that I'm using here. And I'm going to do a screen share really quick so you can see this a lot better than perhaps looking at it through the camera. And here we go. All right. So we're going to go into a breakout group exercise, and the breakout group exercise will last a few minutes. And I actually, I just facilitated this workshop program for Teradyne. I still have Teradyne on it. So here's the questions, right? In your breakout group, can you focus on these three questions? And we're going to have, and Jim, can you show me the breakout groups? So we're going to have three breakout groups. So you're going to be in one of the three groups. You're going to be in a group with approximately 5 people in total. And so we're going to need a scribe for each breakout group. So I'm just looking at who's appearing first on each breakout group. So Dan Cheatham, could you be kind enough to be the scribe for your group? Dan Cheatham.
I cannot, because I'm going to have to leave this thing at some point because I've got another meeting.
That's
So
okay.
I would rather not take that responsibility.
Okay, that's fine. David Gordon, how about yourself? Are you going to stick around? Okay, so could you scribe for your group?
Yeah.
All right. So for your group, I'm going to ask you to start on the first question and work from 1 to 2 to 3, which may not necessarily be the order for the other groups. So the questions are, what actions are taken between team members as they prepare to make a joint sales call? So if you could collaborate with the 4 other group members, find out some ideas on what actions are being taken, and then time permitting, move to what's going well. And then finally, time permitting, what would you like to be better? All right. Fair enough. Got it.
Yeah.
All right. Then I'm going to move to room 2. David Work. It says David Work. David Work. Could you be kind enough to scribe for your group? David Work. David work? I'm trying to find David work on the
He's at the
screen.
bottom.
He's at the bottom. David, are you good?
That's David Burnett. Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Could you be kind enough to scribe then? You're okay with doing that?
Sure, if I understand what you're asking me to do.
Sure. What I'm asking you to do is with your group, start at question number 2. What's going well right now with team selling? And then move on to question 3. What would you like to be better? And then time permitting, go back to question number 1. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay. So scribes, when we come back out of the breakout group exercise, I'm going to ask you all, you scribes, to go ahead and share what you came up with your groups. Okay. And finally, room 3 is Chastity and 4 other people. And Chastity, could you be kind enough to scribe for your group? Yes. Okay. And could you start with question 3? What would you like to be better? And then go back to 1 and 2, time permitting. Is that okay? All right. So this is going to be an 8-minute breakout group exercise. Get a chance to say hello to each other, introduce yourselves. In fact, I'm going to make it a little bit longer. I'm going to make it 10 minutes because sometimes introductions on the first breakout group exercise take a little while. And then I'm going to ask the scribes to take some notes. And then we come back into the larger group. Go ahead and share those notes with the rest of us. And you have access to the workbook in the chat box. So if you need to take these questions with you, make a copy of that link, because once we go into the breakout groups, I don't think you'll have access to that link anymore. So you want to save that link. Is that correct, Jim? They have to save the link when they go into the breakout groups. It won't appear anymore in the chat box.
It should be there.
It'll still be there even if they're in the breakout groups.
Right, from the main to chat, but not the other.
Okay,
one.
fine. All right, so that's easy then. All right, here we go. Again, scribes, please go through the questions with your groups in the order that we talked about. I hope that wasn't too confusing. So with David's group, you're going to start at question 1. With the other David, David says work after your name. Going to start with question 2. And with Chastity's group, you're going to start with question 3. All right, you got 10 minutes. I'm looking forward to seeing what you came up with. It's going to help us navigate course and help you all to get the most out of it. All right, we'll see you back here in 10 in a moment. Jim's going to electronically put you into a room. About a half a minute before the 10 minutes is up, he'll give you a notification. You don't have to press any buttons. He'll bring you back in electronically. So just relax. He'll bring you back in. Have fun. I'll see you in 10 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. Could you be kind enough to put yourself on mute unless you're speaking? And we're going to kick it off with David Gordon's group. So David, please go ahead.
All right. Well, Dan, I know you got cut off, but I got the gist of what you were saying. Okay, we did a quick roundtable because we had 2 reps, 2 distributors, and a manufacturer. So we had the triad of what happens within the industry. Essentially, 2 types of joint sales calls occur. One is when the manufacturer is visiting the territory. And the 2 reps that we had both have people who call on distributors and some people who their sole focus is calling on contractors. So when a factory is coming in, there are times that they will reach out directly to the contractor and set up that call. And there are times they will do that through the distributor. And this will happen potentially weeks in advance. It varies on how much information gets to the manufacturer ahead of time based upon scheduling. For worst case is planning either night before or in the car. The second type of joint sales call is when it's between the rep and the distributor calling on the contractor. At times that can be planned because it's focused on conversions of new products. At other times it's quote unquote, to use Galen's term, instantaneous. I get the call and I need to go there tomorrow. There could be planning or it could be winging it. But to Dan's point, there's too much winging it that happens, and that there needs to be more discussion and planning ahead of time. You know, and we're not necessarily saying it could say half hour, an hour, but it's thinking it through and having a little bit, at least a mental process and taking a breath before going in to the heat of battle. Would that be a good way of synopsizing, Dan?
Yeah, I think my point in that was to make sure everybody has the role, what their roles are and, why each person is there. And, so we don't embarrass each other more than anything else. We don't trip over ourselves in front of the customer, the contractor and or end user.
The other word that was brought up by both the reps and distributors is the word trust.
Trust, what about trust?
It can be variable depending upon the customer, the people, the lines being presented. Because a rep may or may not be, and that distributor may or may not be aligned on some other lines.
Okay,
So it's ensuring that this trust helps make a better call.
okay. All right, you guys did great. Thank you. We'll definitely cover some of these anyway. I'll get to as many as we can. All right, so now we're going to go over to the other David in room 2. Could you please go ahead and share what you came up with?
Sure. Pretty open-ended question. It wasn't entirely clear how to address it, but we had a mix of manufacturer's agent, manufacturers and distributor. And the time went very fast. We ended up getting cut off, but what's going well, and everyone seemed to agree about what was going well was actually ahead of time talking about having the conversation about what the meeting we're going to talk about and what we're not going to talk about. That applies to what David Gordon kind of brought up. If the distributor, everyone wants to always show their full line cards. If the distributor perhaps is not an authorized distributor for a product and a joint sales call, then that particular product shouldn't come up during that call. The conversation was at least with Michael, was that before he's making a joint sales call, and this goes days before, he'll do the research ahead of time so that we have determined exactly what it is we're going to talk about. So I think it was generally agreed that research is happening, coming up with a plan.
All right.
The other thing is it seems like the group understood that time is a valuable commodity to the customer, and so it needs to be established. And I think everyone said they were trying to work to establish, or at least they understand that time is important, that we don't waste time. I made the comment that, the days of going in and spending 20 minutes talking about the weather and the sports teams are over. And I think the customers appreciate that. I think everybody appreciates that. Really what's going well is I think everyone understood that coordination ahead of time of the game plan.
Right.
So it really came down to good planning. And then finally, I think everyone talked about the understanding of you want to see the right people.
Okay, nice
Now,
job.
yeah, okay. Now we did get into question 3 a little bit, so whenever that's appropriate.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay. What would you like to see better is how to sell the story. Making sure, the manufacturer, for example, wants to be more contractor focused. Michael Johnston was talking about that. So how do we make sure that the rep and the distributor, if it's a 3-way joint call, for example, understand the direction and the focus that in that case, the manufacturer wants to the path they want to follow. What's the whole purpose of the meeting? And it seems like that is missing often. And there was a general consensus, and as a distributor, I do have to agree somewhat that the salespeople are not always out promoting product. They can, be guilty of being elephant hunters, but they're the reps are there's confusion about, I guess I'm trying to say this, and I might ask Mark or Michael to step in here.
Yeah.
There is some confusion about where do you buy the product from? Do you direct it to a distributor? Do you leave it wide open for any of the stocking distributors or any distributor? And if anyone in group 2 wanted to step in on that and add something, please do.
Yeah, I'd like to step in on that just a little bit. Because we are very contractor focused for what we do. And it's
Yeah.
really hard for a distributor to sell our product. It seems like anymore, there are a lot of those big white elephant hunters out there. And there are many, many good outside salespeople with distribution, but I'm finding that a lot of them are kind of like glorified order takers. And as they get a little bit further on in their careers, they're set and they just kind of kick back. Well, with us being new to the rep groups and stuff like that, that doesn't work for us. And one of the issues that I find out and what needs to be better is when I go into a sales call and my rep group has a distributor set up the meeting with the contractor, I would say 35 to 40% of the time that relationship that distributor has with the contractor and the products that they're selling that contractor has nothing to do with what we do or can be associated with what I do. Like for me, and I tell the rep groups all the time and the distributors all the time, you got a contractor calling up and buying 200,000 feet of conduit and they're buying a bunch of wire on reels. Well, that's right up our alley. And that's when they need to be talking to us. So I'll go into a meeting where the guy's not selling wire, not selling them conduit, but he's selling them lighting.
Right.
Even though we pull the wire for the lighting and stuff, that doesn't go hand in hand with us, where the distributor that's selling the contract to the conduit and the wire, that's the one I'd rather have setting up that call. Yeah, that's it. That's what I have to say.
Gotcha. That's good. That's great stuff. All right, fantastic. Getting a lot of good information here that's going to help me today to share with you some tips and techniques. So we're going to move on to room 3. And I think did we lose our scribe? Was it Tiffany?
It
No,
wasn't,
you,
but I did
Tiffany.
take notes.
It was Chastity. Yeah, we lost
It was
Chastity.
me, but I got kicked out and put in group 2. So sorry, Tiffany.
That's okay. I did
Sorry.
take notes from our discussion.
All right.
So we did talk about, what would you like to be better? In our group, we all kind of feel this where we're in large geographic areas. So one of the things that was said was oftentimes they don't actually see sales reps because of the large geographic area. So that idea of having that, pre-planning meeting beforehand is not always necessarily possible, especially if they just show up and they're like, hey, all right, I'm here. What are we going to do? Let's go make some calls. So in contrast to what a lot of people have said so far, that pre-planning is not strong, and that is something that definitely needs work. Knowing what product let's say the manufacturer is wanting to talk about, knowing about that ahead of time can help salespeople be able to know what clients to take them to. And did we talk about it last time? I don't want to make a call with that contractor if you're showing the same product or wanting to talk about the same product. So having that pre-planning is very important. And the long-term relationships are key, and building those relationships and kind of that trust that was mentioned before is very important.
Okay, good. Anything else?
Those are all the notes that I've got. Anybody else in room 3?
That's good stuff. Okay. Nice job, you guys. All righty, so let me address some of these things. And I'll start to get into what we have here in the workbook. And I'll do a screen share once again, so it's a little bit easier for you guys to see what I have up here on the whiteboard. And so share screen, go. All right, so as I mentioned before, you got three main parts of your team selling event, whether it's a joint sales call, team sell, whatever. Who's ever going in on that call with you, you need to have a pre-call activity, which is going to involve a coffee shop meeting. Now, we call it a coffee shop meeting. It doesn't necessarily have to take place in a coffee shop. In fact, that might be problematic nowadays. Okay. So to the point that Tiffany, you and your group brought up, have a Zoom call ahead of time, have a conference call ahead of time, have a phone call ahead of time, right? And you obviously, I'm going to address some of those points you brought up right off the bat here, right? Obviously, it's going to make a whole heck of a lot of sense to have an agreement, a verbal agreement, for lack of a written agreement, with whoever it is that's coming with you on joint sales calls, that, you know, in the future, whenever you want to make joint sales calls with me, what I'd like to do is prepare ahead of time. And the preparation ahead of time involves who we're going to see, even if we're just going to do a walk-in, what products or services you might like to offer them. And let's get lined up on that. And let's get lined up on some other things as well. So I want to go through some of those things as well. For example, who's going to captain the call? I'll talk about what that means. Then one of the things that I want to talk about today is how you actually conduct the call itself. Because if one person is trying to promote a particular product and the other person, as much as they'd like to see that product sold, starts to reinforce what that person said, the prospect can start to feel like they're ganged up upon. So there's this specific way that you want to present products or services that you want to sell, and I want to get into that. And then finally, your post-call activities, what you do following the team sell or the joint sales call. Lots of times there aren't any post-call activities and things slip through the cracks. So it's important to schedule that post-call meeting, input call, before you even have the sales call. Get that on your calendars, and even if it's back in the car, that you have that debrief with each other, because chances are that the one of you noticed things that the other one didn't, and vice versa. So it's really good to compare notes after the call and talk about roles and responsibilities, who's going to do what and next. So there's clarity on that. There's no, what we like to call in our course, no mutual mystification, where both parties don't really know what's the next step. So let me break this down a little further. And pre-call activity, let's say you're going to have a 1-hour sales call. Your pre-call activity, you want to allow about 50% of the time allocated for the actual call for your pre-call activity. So if you're going to have a 1-hour sales call, you want to dedicate about a half hour to your coffee shop meeting. And again, this is to get the two of you on the same page as to what's going to take place during the call, and prepare both parties for the history of the account. Or maybe you have the history of the account, but the other party doesn't. You want to get them ready for the history of the account. And I'll go a little bit deeper into that in just a second, right? So you want to review the agenda for the sales call. So in order to develop relationships that are stronger in trust, it's important to get on the same page with each other. Nobody likes surprises on a sales call from their partner. And so reviewing the agenda for the call includes, who's going to captain the call. And again, I'm going to come back to that in a second. But the background on the account, what's the decision-making process generally within the account? What are their pains, deep-seated emotional need that would compel people to buy something? And then, notes from past calls, go over that, the history of the account. And then we get into roles and responsibilities. So who's going to be the team leader? how you're going to orchestrate the selling team, rehearse. You might even rehearse ahead of time as to what you're going to say, what they're going to say, how you're going to open up the call. So generally the person that has the relationship with the account is going to be the captain, the one who holds the psychological control baton. And they get to pass that baton through verbal and nonverbal passes. And so when you do that, you can have better control of the call and have a better control on what the outcome of the call is. So those are some of the aspects of the call, and then techniques. And I'm going to get into that in just a second. I'm giving you kind of the high level first here, right? So techniques to be employed to maintain control over the process. How do you control your partner? Picking up the talking as your partner takes a break. And then it says looking at your notes and say you have a question and then regaining control. So I'm going to talk about that in case you have a runaway partner. Can anybody guess what I mean by a runaway partner? I'll stop the share for a second. Anybody want to take a shot at that? What's a runaway partner?
Somebody that says, yeah, we can do that when you know that we can't.
Okay. That's a great example. And what's another example of a runaway partner?
Someone who gets off topic and starts talking about other things than what you'd agreed upon.
Exactly right. So it's important to have the coffee shop meeting to reach an agreement on what you're going to talk about, what are the pains within the account, the history of the account, and all those kinds of things. And so let me talk a little bit about some of the things that could be covered in your pre-call planning. There's a bunch of pages in here to give you an idea. Okay, I'm not going to go through every single one of these cotton picking things, but it's some great stuff in here, right? How have they made decisions concerning similar purchases? That's a good one. How long have they, the persons that you're meeting with, how long have they been at the company? And then a lot of bonding information here. Okay. A lot of stuff in here if you want to go through it, review it with your partner. You're not going to use every single thing in here necessarily on every account. So here's some of the highlights, right? What's the goal of the joint sales call? What is the goal of the joint sales call? Now, ideally, I'm going to give you the ideal, right? Nirvana is that you've discussed ahead of time with your client, customer, prospect, whoever you're meeting with. And you've developed what we like to call an upfront contract with your client, your customer, your prospect that supports your goal for the call. Okay. So I want to do a little training on what an upfront contract is. And it's not in the workbook, but based on some of the things that you guys brought up, there needs to be stronger and better agreements between each of you, whoever you're making the joint sales call with, as well as with the customer. So it's important that you guys have a little bit of background on what an upfront contract is. So could somebody be kind enough to share with me a goal that you might have for a sales call based on a need that you've identified with the customer? Can anybody help me out with that? A goal that you've identified for the sales call based on a need that you've identified with a customer. Anybody have any thoughts on that? What's a need that one of your customers could have? What kind of needs could your customers have? Could everybody just put in the chat box, what's a need that you can help your customer fulfill? If you could just go ahead and put one in the chat box, that would be great. What's a need you can help them fulfill? A problem that you can help them to overcome. A situation that they're frustrated with that your deliverables can help them with. All right, so I have Tiffany, find something in stock or quick ship that doesn't have a lengthy lead time. Got a whole bunch of stuff now. energy savings, maximize rebate dollars, introduction of a new product that addresses productivity improvement. Okay, so David, can you elaborate a little bit on what you put in the chat box when you say introduction of a new product that addresses productivity improvement? You got to unmute yourself, by the way. There you go. Okay.
Yeah, well, and I just did it kind of generic, but a lot of joint sales calls is that the rep is introducing a new product from a manufacturer. And that new product is gonna save contractors time. So contractors are interested in things that are time saving.
Right.
So it, I was just doing a generic application there.
Right.
But that's something that happens regularly because the contractor needs job site, Michael Johnson's product offering is all about job site productivity benefits. He happens to have a solution instead of just the product itself.
Gotcha. So ideally, and I'm going to insert a blank page here so I can make some notes.
Thank you, David.
Okay. Ideally, you've identified that the prospect or the customer has a need for productivity improvement, or they're concerned with the cost of productivity. Their throughput isn't as high as they'd like it to be. Okay. And so you've had a conversation with them ahead of time, and you call them up, and I'm going to make up a hypothetical situation. So try and put up with me a little bit because it may not apply to everybody. But let's say for example, you're a manufacturer's representative. Your principal has something that can help them improve productivity. So far, am I on track with an example that might fit for some people? Okay, just checking. All right. So you called up, you're the manufacturer's representative. You called up your customer and you said, hey, David, you do a little blinding report and you say, hey, David, if I had something that might help you improve your productivity, would you be interested? And let's pretend the customer says, yeah, why? What do you got? Right? You say, well, I have something that could actually improve your productivity by 5 to 10%, which based on how much throughput you have, that would be pretty substantial. And what I'd like to do is set a time to bring my principal in to talk to you about it. Would that be okay with you? And let's assume that they said yes. Okay. So then you move into what's called an upfront contract. And there are 5 elements to the upfront contract. And I'm going to break them down for you. So we have an acronym here that's PAYDO. So let me spell it out and then I'll go through what each of them is. So the first one is purpose. What's the purpose of the sales call? Then you go into agenda theirs. Then from there, we move into agenda hours. And then into time, how long for the sales call, and then into outcome. Now, before you get into the upfront contract and the customer says, yeah, I'd be interested in that. And you say, well, I'd like to come by with my principal, set a time to come by with my principal and talk to you about how we can do that. Why don't I give you a quick flyover of what I'm talking about? And then assuming you like that, why don't we just talk a little bit about what we're going to cover when I come and visit you? So you give a quick flyover of it, just a 1 or 2 minute flyover of it. Does that still sound like something you'd be interested in? And let's assume they say, yeah, that sounds fine. I'd love to hear more about it. Okay, so why don't we set up a time for the sales call? So the next step that you want to take is to actually schedule the call. So you get it on your calendar and you get it on your customer's calendar. And once you've scheduled the call, then you move into the upfront contract and you say, well, now that we set up a time to get together, if we talk a little bit about what's going to happen when I see you? And usually at that point, they're going to say, yeah, sure. So as I understand it, our purpose in getting together is to see if it makes sense for you to take advantage of this product, which we think will help you improve your throughput. Agreed? So each of these elements of the upfront contract, you want to reach an agreement on each of them. So let's assume they say, yep, that makes sense. Got it. Generally, when we meet with people to talk about this product, They have 1 or 2 or 3 things on their agenda that they're going to want us to talk about. To better prepare me and my principal for our meeting with you, can you help me with 1 or 2 or 3 things that you might like to have on your agenda that you might like us to talk about? Now, David, I don't know what you had in mind, but can you take a shot at just to breathe a little life into the example, what you might have had in mind, and then 1 or 2 or 3 things that they might have on their agenda that they'd like us to talk about when we visit them for the joint sales call? Okay.
Yeah, they're working on a larger they're working on a large commercial project. Gonna have, you know, a dozen townhomes, gonna have to pull X amount of wire and install, you know, 300 cans
Okay,
and wire those townhomes.
okay,
So, you know, I know it's gonna need 15 people or 40, you know, it's gonna take 40 different man hours. How much time can you save me by, you know, pulling it faster, using less material, reducing my on-site labor costs?
got it. All right. So you move from agenda theirs to agenda ours. And in the sales role, are there things that in this particular instance, you might like the prospect to prepare to share with you when you come and visit them with your principal? Can you think of anything that might be useful?
Well, especially in this scenario, if you told the customer what the product was ahead of time, then he could prepare how many hours he's gonna have.
That's exactly what I was looking for. Okay, good. And then,
The key is mutual preparation.
exactly right. But you're clarifying it, you're talking about it, so when you get there, it's a lot more productive. And also, when you have your coffee shop meeting with your principal, you're more likely to be on the same page, which will build a stronger relationship and more trust, right? And the principal and you will not feel like you're wasting the client's time and each other's time.
Well, Greg, let me interrupt on one element.
Yeah.
That adds a little bit of complexity, but I think it adds the value. A lot of these joint sales calls are really a 3-way because they involve the distributor. So it's the rep, the distributor, and the contractor, more so sometimes than the manufacturer. And the calls may be set up by the distributor. So a lot of times it comes down to getting to the right type of customer for that product offering, which is the preparation aspect there versus just get me a bunch of meetings.
Right, right. So you can go ahead and get the meetings, but it could be, you really, what you want to do is reach out to them ahead of time, find out what trouble they have, problems they have, what are they concerned about, find a product or service that will help them with those things, and then develop an upfront contract so you have very productive meetings.
Because it's an issue of quality versus quantity.
That's exactly right. And as somebody mentioned earlier, everybody's concerned about time right now, because as that person, I think it was Mike, you know, years ago, if you had a reasonably good personality, you showed up on a sales call, you do a little blind report, you leave with an order. Nowadays, because of company right sizing, downsizing, everybody's goal is to keep their job, right? They don't care about building relationships so much anymore as they used to. They just want to keep their job and grow within the organization, perhaps. So it's important to uncover their pain, their problems, their goals, their KPIs, key performance indicators. See if you have something that can help them with that. Schedule the meeting, develop an upfront contract, go over the purpose of it, of the meeting, what's on their agenda first, then you go to your agenda. Once you've done those 3 things, then you go back to time, and you could say to the prospect, well, given what we have as our purpose in getting together, what you have on your agenda, what I have on my agenda, how much time do you think we should block for the visit? And let's say that you know you're going to need 45 minutes, and sometimes they're going to say, oh, probably 45 minutes. But other times, if they say, how about 20 minutes, you can easily go back to, well, given the fact that we're talking about potentially improving your throughput by, 10%. And given what we have as our purpose and what's on your agenda and my agenda, in my experience, I'd love to be able to block 45 minutes. We might get done sooner, but would that be okay with you? So a lot of times by going over these three things first, you'll get how much time you want. And then the last step is to agree on outcomes for the meeting. So it could sound something like this. So David, and let's say we're in a role play, right? So David, based on what we just talked about, how about if we agree by end of meeting, we're going to decide as to whether or not it makes sense to have another meeting to discuss this further, or close the file on this one and part as friends. Or alternatively, as an outcome step, you could say, now you got to get the fit right on this. It's all situational. Based on what we've covered here today, how about if by end of meeting, we make a decision on whether or not you want to let a purchase order for a small pilot program, try it out. Or if you don't think there's any fit, we can just close the file on this one. And as far as I'm concerned, part as friends. Is that okay with you? So you want to develop an agreement as to what the outcome is going to be. So it could be a clear future, a scheduled next step, or a no. Or again, depending upon the situation, it could be a decision for a yes or a no. Alternatively, it could even be a decision for them to introduce you to somebody else in the organization who's in charge of that or has authority over that, give you an introduction, or to tell you there's no fit and it's a no. But in any case, what's the one thing I don't have on any of those outcome steps? What's not acceptable at the end of the sales call?
No
Anyone?
direction.
Yeah, no direction. Exactly right. So any form of a maybe, right? We don't want that. Okay. So the reason we have the outcome step is so that you leave every sales call with what we like to call as an acceptable outcome. And the acceptable outcomes in the Sandler selling methodology, and that's the methodology that we train on around here, are a yes, a no, a clear future, for example, a scheduled next meeting, or an introduction. Okay, got it. All right. I want to go back to the three parts of the sales call. And I want to just share with you all a little bit on defining the roles because it came up. And so, preceding the call, you have that pre-call activity, the coffee shop meeting, right? That's a really good time in the coffee shop meeting. It could be virtually, it could be in a coffee shop, it could be in a meeting room. And if it's a big sale that you're working on, you might have multiple coffee shop meetings. In that meeting, you want to define the roles amongst other things. So I have some notes here, and I want to talk about the team captain. So whenever you have two or more people on a joint sales call, not counting the prospect or the customer, right? You want to have an agreement in your coffee shop meeting as to who's going to captain the call. So what is the team captain? The team captain doesn't mean whoever has the biggest title on their business card. It just indicates the person who had developed the relationship with the prospect prior to the call. The role might switch as the call progresses, but who is the team captain as you walk in the door? As team captain, you must ensure that you both agree on how you would handle the swapping of roles of team captain and partner. That is, how you would pass the baton between the two of you. Okay, so let me just stop right there. So there's two ways to pass the baton. So let's say, David, you and I, we're partners, and we're going in on a joint sales call. We've had our coffee shop meeting ahead of time, and you have had the relationship with the account. So because you developed the relationship with the account and you're bringing me in as a technical expert or maybe a principal, then it would make sense for you to be the team captain on that sales call, kick it off, review the upfront contract that you established over the phone or at a prior meeting with the prospect, right? And then at some point, pull me into the meeting. So I'll be in the meeting with you, but verbally pull me into the meeting or non-verbally pull me into the meeting. And that's what baton passing is all about. So say, for example, the prospect asks me, have you ever worked with an account like ours before solving this type of applications problem? So what I might do, and they asked me that question, I might defer to my principal, and I might say, that's a great question. I'll tell you, David Gordon's here with us today. David, could you be kind enough to go ahead and answer the question? So I pass the baton over to you. And the rule is only the captain can ask questions on a sales call. The other person cannot. Does anybody know why? What's the downside of allowing both parties, both sellers, to be able to ask questions on a sales call? What happens when they're both doing it? Anybody guess? Questions can change the direction of the sales call. Therefore, what generally makes the most sense is to have one team captain who can decide if they're going to pass the baton to their mate or keep the baton. So if I pass the baton over to, if David passes the baton over to me, he can use eye contact to let me know he wants me to keep the baton. So for example, if we're face to face, he could be looking at me for as long as he wants me to hold the baton. And then we've agreed ahead of time in the coffee shop meeting, when he starts looking at the prospect again, he wants the baton back. He wants me to stop talking and hand the baton back to him. So another way to do it, and one of my clients actually came up with this, is a nonverbal pass. Well, we have the concept of verbal and nonverbal passing, but they came up with an idea on how to pass the baton nonverbally. And I'll show you what they came up with. So what they came up with is that, for example, on this sales call, David, if you want to have the baton, you're holding your pen with the tip down on the table. When you want to pass it over to me, you flip your pen over. And that tells me that you want to give me the baton. When you want it back, you flip your pen over again so that the tip is down on the table. Okay. So it's a great way for the captain can stay in control of the sales call and not let the partner kind of derail it or take it in a direction that they didn't intend for it to go and get off track. But again, it doesn't work unless you have that coffee shop meeting where you review who's going to captain the call and who is not going to captain the call. Got it? Okay, so why would you want to pass the baton? Let's say the salesperson is the team captain. He's had 2 or 3 prior meetings with this prospect and has already established a relationship. As salesperson, he is ultimately responsible for bringing this piece of business in the door. He may decide to pass the baton because the prospect wants the technical person, their partner, to come in and answer technical questions. And the partner has to ask technical questions to make sure she or he understands where the prospect is from in a process point of view. So there's automatically more credibility when the technical person comes in because the prospect doesn't expect to be sold by this person. At the coffee shop meeting, drive home this point with your partner. He or she has an automatic advantage, especially if they're technical and they're being brought in as a technical person. They have an automatic advantage because they aren't representing sales. So what you can do in your coffee shop meeting is come up with questions that your technical person is going to ask the prospect, and generally they're going to answer them. And so there's lots of advantages to joint sales calls. You can do things on joint sales calls that are somewhat difficult to do if it's just a one-on-one type of a basis. Okay. The first rule of joint sales calls is that only one person can talk at a time. When 2 people get going on the prospect, you can lose control. The prospect can start to feel a lot of pressure, and generally your closing ratio goes down when that happens, and you can hurt bonding and rapport. Okay, so you set an upfront contract with the client. You have a coffee shop meeting with your partner. You go on the joint sales call, but before you go on the joint sales call, a good idea is to rehearse what's going to happen on the joint sales call together. And then the last step of it is have an input call following the joint sales calls where you can share notes with each other. And oh, by the way, that brings up an excellent point. If David, you and I are on a joint sales call together and you're captaining the call, well, while you're talking to the prospect and they're talking to you, I'm going to be taking notes. So I'll head down, I'm taking notes. If you hand me the baton verbally or non-verbally, while I have the baton, you take notes. So now we have a nice set of notes at the end of it. And by me having head down taking notes, it also creates a situation where the prospect is less likely to ask me questions. I want the questions to go to the captain, and then the captain decides whether or not they're going to hand the baton over to me or not. That's best practice. Now, it could be that you're introducing your principal and it's a 1 hour sales call and your principal has the baton for 50 minutes of the call. That's fine, especially since you had an upfront contract with the client as to what you're going to cover and you reviewed it in your coffee shop meeting. So as long as they're staying on track, you're in good shape. I want to share one more thing with you before we go into a breakout group. We have a chance to discuss some of your takeaways from what we've trained on so far today. In the case of a runaway partner, let's say you handed your baton over to your partner and they start to ask questions. They start to take the sales call in a different direction. You've lost control. It's going off track. You can see that you're not going to get to a decision point at the end of the call because they, for whatever reason, they started to bring up something else. So they got involved in this big, long, elaborate story that's taking up too much time. The strategy is you look like you're taking notes and then you interject and you say, excuse me, I have a question. Excuse me for interrupting. Then you pose your question to the prospect, to the customer, and you continue to look at the customer and you never look back at your partner again. You take the baton back and you maintain or you regain control of the call. So that's your best odds of actually getting to a point at the end where you have that good outcome step and you get a decision at the end of it. So that was a kind of a flyover of the 3 steps of the call and the different things that you want to have happen during the call. And there's a page in here that has everything that I've just talked about. Okay. So I'm going to go into the last page in the workbook, which is 14-day implementations. And so David Borowski, David, you be okay with being the scribe for this last exercise? Yeah. Okay, cool. And Michael Johnson, would you be okay with being a scribe for your group for this exercise? Yeah. Okay, good. So here's the exercise. So over the next 14 days, something I'm going to help my team start doing, right? What are some of the takeaways from something that you would help your team to start doing? And then the other question up here is something I'm going to help me stop doing. Okay. So I'm going to just modify this a little bit. So something for the team and something for yourself that you're going to implement over the next 14 days. Could you guys discuss that? And we're going to make this, we'll make this an 8-minute breakout group exercise. And then when you come back, I'm going to ask the scribes to go ahead and share those 2 things. What's something that you all can agree on, or maybe several things that you're going to help your team start doing? And then something you're going to help yourself to stop doing. Okay. Makes sense. Is that clear? Michael? Got it? Okay.
Yes.
And David, that clear? Okay. All right, you guys, here we go. 8 minutes. I'll see you back here. Something for the team, something for yourself, based on what you got out so far today.
Yes.
All right. Who'd like to kick us off with the takeaways?
I can do it.
Okay,
So from our team, which was Jennifer, Galen, and Scott, and myself, in terms of suggestions for our teams, encourage better listening. So even if you have good planning, when you go into a meeting, just to have the awareness that it may not go exactly in the direction that you had intended, but you better be listening to what your customer's saying and make sure you're addressing their needs. And obviously a big takeaway for all of us from this entire meeting today is just to improve the pre-planning and the organization of the calls, making it a little more standardization in terms of how you prepare and execute a call, which would lead to even greater professionalism. In terms of self, several of us said to be much more aware of grabbing control of the baton without it necessarily being handed to us when we're at a meeting.
Yeah.
And also listening to the other people, not just our customer, but the other people that are part of our team that are making the sales call. And to have a greater awareness where you're not working as cohesively as possible in the sales call and trying to bring that together.
hey, those are some great takeaways. Let me ask you guys a question, see who can get this one right as well. In your follow-up meeting, following the sales call, how long should that meeting last? What would you say would be a good rule of thumb as to how long that follow-up meeting, that input meeting, following your joint sales call, with you and your partner, you and your partners, how long should that last? Anybody want to take a guess at it? There's no ante on the table. You can't lose any money here. What do you think? If you had a 1 hour sales call, how long as a guide should your input meeting following that 1 hour sales call last? Anybody have any thought? Yeah, please go ahead, Jennifer.
Would say as long as your original meeting, if not longer, if you're actually dissecting it.
Wow. Okay. So if you have a 1 hour meeting with your customer, you're talking about a 1 hour input meeting to dissect the call.
Because I'm going to talk about the next meeting while I'm in that meeting as well.
With your partner.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Somebody else have an answer? Anybody else have a thought on that? A guess? Well, our rule, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I think it kind of depends on the action step. So I hate to be vague, but if you get a no, well, it's a 5-minute meeting.
Yeah.
If you get an action step and I do think part of it is I always try to challenge my sales team is their number one goal in a meeting is to try to walk out of there with a second meeting scheduled.
Very good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if they get a no, something went wrong prior to the meeting. Maybe there was not a phone call or a meeting of the minds with the prospect or the customer as to why you're going on the call or something else. So you'd probably, David, you probably want to do some serious debriefing in a case like that with your partner.
Yeah, to me, a no just means not yet. And so something failed in that call. There was some type of failure, and it could be another distraction, or the person you're meeting with, their mind was on something else. They could have family issues at home. You don't know.
Yeah.
But not to give up, and there's still a follow-up that can be there with an email or another phone call or something like that. But when you get a no, to me, that meeting that you have with the salesperson who was with you or the rep that was with you, understanding why you got the no is more important than
very important. Yeah.
getting a yes. So because you don't want that to happen again.
Well, look, while we're talking about these takeaways, I'm going to ask Jim to put up a polling question. If you'd like, I'd love to get a little feedback from you on how you like the workshop, but I'd also like to talk to you about if you're interested in ongoing reinforcement training, because generally that's what makes things really work. So Jim, if you could be kind enough to put up the polling question. And by the way, the answer to the question of how long the input call should last, in the Sandler methodology, it's a minimum of 15 minutes for a 1 hour call.
Yeah.
So Jennifer, as you said, I mean, you could take up to an hour, but you want to have a minimum of 25% of the length of the call itself. So if it's a 2-hour call, you're talking about a minimum of a half hour. Let me come over to the other group, and what were your takeaways in the other group? And let's see, who scribed for the other group?
It was me, Michael.
Okay, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, we had a lot of takeaways. Do we have another hour here?
Okay, I'll tell you what, we don't have another hour. We got about 3 minutes.
Okay, I'll go quick. I'll
As I
do.
can see- oh,
I did Evelyn Wood speed reading dynamics, so I can handle this.
all
So,
right. Well, I'm gonna put up a link to my calendar for anybody that wants to set the appointment now. It'll go right to my calendar. You can set up an appointment with me. And go ahead, Michael, while we're getting that link up there for everybody.
So, you know, the big thing that came up is time, no time wasting. And you got to make sure that the sales calls are focused. So that's what, you know, your 14-day implementation is to make sure that gets set up. Because sales scenarios can differ greatly. And, you know, depending on what the scenario is, how you're going to set up that call. Follow up, there needs to always be a better follow-up. There never can be enough follow-up. And it was brought up that making sure that you're using the CRM to make sure you schedule those follow-ups that you know, because we all get so busy and we forget about things that are supposed to happen in a week or 2 weeks. David brought up, Gordon brought up about having a planned follow-up. And it's really important because he said trust is built on success. And of all the statements, one of the statements I heard today, that one hit me the most, that trust is built on success. And you need to make sure that you ask focused questions when you're in that sales call, and then shut up, stop selling and listen. You know, that's one of my problems. I'll tend to talk too much instead of listening, you know. So I always hear from the pastor of church, God gave you one mouth and 2 ears, so it's supposed to be listening more than we're talking. And I think that there are many touches required. Sometimes it could be 3, 4, or 5 touches before you get to where you need to go. And then David Brockner has said, you know, you have to have an agenda. And without agenda going into these meetings, and then Dave Gordon threw in there, go, yeah, it makes people think, you know, when you have an agenda. So that's our takeaways.
Yeah, so I agree with everything you said, and that's why we like to establish an upfront contract with the client, so we clearly identify the agenda. And I'm going to leave you with this, which goes to one of the other points that you and your group made, Michael, which is that I believe that our value as sales professionals increases not with the amount of information we dispense, but more so with the amount of information we gather. And so I'm looking forward to seeing some of you really soon. I want to thank you all for doing a great job today, and take care and have a good day. Good selling. And thank you. David Gordon.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for your time, participation and readership. And if we can help or share any other ideas, give us a holler.
Nice meeting everyone.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Take care. Bye.